Welcome class to your lecture video for Chapter 9, Collecting Data with Forms. In Chapter 9, we are going to learn how to plan and create a form, edit and format a form, work with form objects, and test and process a form. So planning and creating a form. A form on a web page consists of form objects. Now these objects are something that you have seen every day that you're on the internet ordering something. So these might be your input boxes, a radio button, a drop-down type of menu, and then ultimately we will click on what we call a submit button, or maybe it's complete order, depends on what kind of text that they have provided for you on that button. Form labels identify that form field or that form object by its functions. So if they want us to put in the first name, they're going to put a label of first name next to it. Or if it's just name, it's probably your first and last names together. Address information, city, state, zip, those kind of items. And those are our form labels. All forms need to be connected to an application server that will process that information that you, the user, or your visitor to your website needs to collect. It either will store that data in a database or simply send it to you in an email message. When planning your form content, you need to carefully plan it out in a logical order that makes sense to the visitors that are going to fill out the form. The most important information should be on the part of the page that is visible before you have to scroll to see the rest. We, in the design field, talk about that as above the fold. So we think about a newspaper and how it's folded in half. What you want visitors to see or readers to see is what is before that fold. The form should have good contrast between the color of the text and the color of your form background. So to create a form, so before we jump into this forms category, I want you to take a visual on page 9-5 of figure 1. So this is something that I usually have on-campus students do in class, where I have them sketch out on paper exactly what information they need to get from their form. So in this example, this is the actual form that we'll be creating for Striped Umbrella, and it's just a visual of how it would look. Now, of course, when you sketch it out, you're probably not going to have all the fancy details, but a good sketch will allow you to go into Dreamweaver and create that form in a much easier fashion. To make your form usable, you need to configure it so that it talks to the scripts or email server and processes that information users enter. Now, in this particular course, we don't really have the knowledge to be able to allow it to talk to a database. So I'm going to provide you the email option, and I'm going to provide you also a JavaScript feedback type of program as well. So you'll see that as we get to the end. So two methods to process the information that is collected in a form, and that is server-side scripting and client-side scripting. So server-side scripting simply means that we are processing the information on a web server. So the information is then sent to a web server, maybe stored in a database, and is interacted in some way. Client-side means that the user's computer, so who is ever visiting my website, is actually processing that form data. The script resides on the web page rather than on the server, and that is one option that I'll be providing for you. And I'll be providing that in the language called JavaScript, so we'll see that on our assignments page. You can process form information several ways. So I just talked about a few ways, so let's just break them down further. Have the information collected from the form and emailed to the contact person on the website. So we'll set that up. I'll demonstrate that and how we can use that for our form. Have form data stored in a database to use at a later date. Again, we don't have the knowledge to do that at this point. Have the application both collect the form data in a database and send it to an email message. Have the form data processed instead of stored. You use your Properties Inspector to specify settings for your form, and those settings include what is going to process the form and how is the data actually going to be sent. So the action property specifies the application or script that will process the form data. So, and we're going to see where we can put email in there, and then we're going to use our JavaScript file as well. So here is our form. The form that you see on page 9-5 built inside of Dreamweaver, and then we have our form properties down at the bottom. So we'll be working with our form ID, we'll be working with this method post versus get, and then we also have target here as well. Where do we want say the process information to display, and so we'll be working with that as well. And so we'll be continuing to work with the Properties Inspector with a lot of different form options. So the method property says how do we transfer the actual data? So how is it actually sent? The get method specifies that ASCII data collected in the form will be sent to the server appended to the URL. So if you see up here in my address bar, once I hit this question mark right here, anything beyond that is similar to our get method. Okay, so all of our data would be sent along in the address bar with the get method. It's certainly not a secure method by any means. Post method specifies that the form data should be sent to the processing script as a binary or encrypted file, allowing you to send data securely. When you specify the post method, there is no limit to the amount of information that can be collected in the form, and the information is secure. When we use the get method, we are limited to, I believe, if I recall correctly, 100 characters. We don't use the get method very often, so that's why it's not totally in my thought process of how many characters that is. Just seeing if I can find it here real quick. 8K or less, so 8 kilobytes or less depending on the web browser. The form name property specifies a unique name for the form. It can be a string of any alphanumeric characters and cannot include spaces. Target property lets you specify the window in which you want that form data to be processed. So Common Gateway Interface is what CGI stands for, and it's one of the most popular tools used to collect our form data. CGI is just really an umbrella term that encompasses lots of different types of programming languages, such as Python or PHP, those types of languages. They can be also written in maybe Perl or C. The resulting data is then stored in a database or sent to an email server. So again, depending on how we send it up, depends on how the data is actually processed. So let's look at pages 8 and 9. So 8 has us open a data file, and that's 9_1 from your data files. And then we are going to save it as feedback. It's been a while since we've actually used a data file, if I remember correctly. So we want to save it in our Stripe and Umbrella folder, and we're going to save it as feedback. So OK on the JavaScript error, and no on our update links. So now we have our feedback page, and we are going to insert a form in between our first couple sentences and our address information. So I'm going to come into Design View to go ahead and do this process. And in your Insert panel from your HTML category, you are going to select Form. So I promised you at the very beginning of the semester that we would jump out of HTML and actually use a different category, and here we are. So we're going to insert a form. When we do that, you'll see a red dashed outline, and that's because we have set it up in a view to actually see it that way. So there are some settings that you can change if we don't have that option. I can't remember exactly where it's at. It's invisible elements if it doesn't show up for you. So we are going to now click on that red dashed outline and use our Properties Inspector. I'm going to dock it down here at the bottom again. And we're going to change the form ID to be feedback. This is on page 9-9, number 2. Again, no spaces. And then the method is going to stay post. Okay, at this point we're not putting in anything in the action. I'll demonstrate that later on. Edit and format a form. So just as we have used CSS or tables throughout the semester to format our content, we can do the same thing with a form. So we are going to use a table to actually lay out the columns of our form. So we will not have as many of these fields, but we're going to put all of our labels in the first column and all of our form controls or form objects, form fields in the second column, just as you saw on page 9-5. So we want to make sure that we create labels that instruct our visitors exactly what kind of information we want them to enter. If we can prevent them from actually typing, that's exactly what we want to do. So if we can provide, say, a radio group or a checkbox type of group that allows them to select options so we can limit their typing, then that's what you want to do as well. Labels also play an important role in accessibility. So for users that are having their screen read to them, it's important to have that label. Another example of clear label fields. You can add labels to a form using one of two methods. You can simply type a label in the appropriate table cell or div. This actually does not provide accessibility, this first option. You can use the label button in the forms category on your insert panel to link the label to the form object. And we'll actually demonstrate this where it actually is kind of like a 2-in-1. With CSS3, many of the tags previously used to position table content are deprecated. So if you use a table to position data in a form, you'll need to create or modify CSS rules to format the labels and data fields, such as their horizontal and vertical alignment. So let's look at pages 12 through 15. We're actually going to start creating form fields here. But first we're going to create a layout for it. So we're going to come back to HTML category and we're going to click on table. And we're going to go 10 rows by 2 columns. And I want you to be very careful. There is no table width, no border specified. So make sure that these are blank when you're creating this table, as well as the tables that you'll create for Blooms and TripSmart or maybe even Coffee Shop. Okay, we want to have the top header option. Okay, and we're going to provide no caption or summary. Okay, so now we have a table. Notice that it is auto-centered and it's 80%. And that is feeding off the table that we created back in chapter 6. So the styles are then coming through. So I'm going to modify the directions a little bit as I go through some of these pages. So if you see me not entering in labels as we go through, it's because I have an alternate type of plan. So we first want to merge these two cells, and then we put in our heading. Okay, and so based on what we had developed in our planning process of our form depends on how many rows and columns we're going to need. So again, important to draw that out. So from this, we know that we are not going to have any type of informational type of labels here in those first 3 rows. But this one is going to reflect some checkboxes. This one is going to actually reflect some radio buttons. And so that one actually refers to, I'll look back here on page 9-5, a drop-down type of option, so a menu option for us. Okay, so notice that the content is in place in the first cell. The first cell is always going to be our label, and so we're going to be using our code view down here to move items around to that Dreamweaver creates. Okay, so add a form label using the label button. Let's see here. So in this cell, verify the insertion point is in the cell below the one that contains I learned about you from. Okay, and we're going to put in the word comments. So back to our form category, and if we come down, label is at the very bottom. So I'm going to click on label, and then I'm going to put in comments for my content. Oh, looks like I hit a key. So comments. I actually didn't do it right, so I'm going to have to jump down here in code view. Comments. So I don't want this NBSP, and it stands for non-breaking space. It is inserted inside of table cells so that they don't collapse. So if you have content in there, you're definitely going to want to remove that. So just a matter of deleting it. Okay, so this becomes the label for our text area box, and eventually we will probably get rid of this, what we just did in this step, but I'll hold off on doing that until we get into further steps. Create a rule for the form table, so we're going to create a rule for the TD. So I'm going to click on TD down here, and I'm going to set up vertical alignment. So using my CSS Designers panel, I'm going to set up a rule for the TD tag. So SU styles and then global. So a new global tag selector and SU styles is what number 1 on page 15 specifies. That modifies the TD tag with the following property. So I'm going to add, and I'm just going to type in TD. And then I'm going to go to the layout category, and I'm going to come down and find vertical. I can't remember exactly. Maybe it's up here. Oh, it's in the text category. My bad. So vertical alignment. And so we're going to say top. So that means that all of our content within a table cells is going to be pushed to the top of the cell. And we'll see how that actually affects our content. Working with form objects. So now we're going to start inserting some input fields, some radio boxes, some check boxes. So what are they? So here's an example of what a text field is. Text area field, a menu list, and then submit button down here at the bottom. So text fields, most common. This allows the visitor to type their information in. Again, we want to make these minimal if possible, so that if it's options that you want a user to be able to enter in, give them options such as a radio group or a checkbox group. Text area field is kind of like a comment area where you're allowed to type over several lines. Checkboxes, multiple selections can be created from a checkbox, so they could have 5 checkboxes and they could select all 5, or they could select 2 of them. Radio buttons, list of options, and only one can be selected, so it's like either this one or this one or this one. Can't have all 3. A menu or a list is an option that drops down, and we allow users to either select a single option, or maybe they're allowed to select multiple options. Hidden fields, these fields are used to usually send along information to the processing script on the other end. the web server that's actually processing the form information, but the user didn't need to know about that information that was set. Image field allows you to create buttons that contain custom graphics. File field allows you to upload files. And then our forms are nothing. They are nothing. They are not functional without a submit button. So make sure that every form has a submit button. We can also use a reset button. Just make sure that when you position the reset button, that you position it carefully so that a user doesn't accidentally click on it just because of a design flaw. So pages 19 through 29. So we're going to be building our form, and we are going to start by putting first name. So instead of me typing my label here in my first column, I'm actually going to come over here to my second column. So this is where the directions really start to be different. They're more effective. So we're going to click on text, and we do that. Notice that we have a label right next to it. Well, this label is where I'm going to type in my first name. Now, whether you want a colon behind it, that's totally your preference. But first name is actually what was specified in number 1. But we did it when we clicked on the text button. So notice in the code here it says label for text field. Okay, and so we haven't actually given this text field a name yet. So I'm going to click on the text field itself. I'm going to come down in the properties inspector, and I'm going to give it the name of first underscore name. My size of my field for display purposes is 40 characters, and they're allowed to type in no more than 100. If I wanted to put in a default value here, I could. So for example, if I think all of my visitors are going to come to me from the state of North Dakota, and it's a state field, I could have North Dakota typed here, but I probably would use a drop-down type of option for this. We can set up fields as required. So if you want, you can set them up as required here just by clicking on that checkbox that says required equal required. Okay. Autocomplete is also an option. So if we want autocomplete on, so if they filled in a similar type of field before, this will give them option of it popping up to them in their browser. Okay, so from here what I'm going to do is take the label, so opening label tag to closing label tag, and I'm going to move it into this table cell because I actually want it to be positioned there. So you can cut, and then you would paste it over this NBSP. See if it'll actually paste. There we go. Okay, so now my label is over here and my field is over here. Okay, so we're going to do the same process over and over again. Now I also want to point out to you that whatever this says, for equal first name, actually matches ID equal first name. Okay, so these two need to match in order for accessibility to happen. So we're going to do the same process here for last name. So we'll click on text, and then we will type in last name here. Click on the text box, name the field, last underscore name, size 40, max length 100. Then the next step beyond that, setting up the field, is to take that label from that cell, the second cell, cut it, and paste it over the content in the first cell. So now we have first name and we have last name. Okay, and again, notice the for and the ID match. Okay, we're going to do that as well for email. So a third time of practice. But this time we're going to do email instead of text. Email sets up parameters that allow us to actually make sure that they're inputting a correct email address. So this one, it says Actually, I think in their directions they wanted you to do a text field, but you know what? Just do email, and then go ahead and take label and position it, and again in that first cell. So it all sets it up exactly how we need it to be. I'm going to take this colon off just to be consistent with the first name and last name. And so now we have email. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and put colons in here because these have colons. Again, just, you know, the little things that make things different. So automatically set up as type email, name email, ID email, and so actually the step on page 20 is just doing the email and then moving the label. Insert a multi-line text field. So this is our comments box. So we are going to use a multi-line text. So it's a text area. So we'll click on text area, and we notice here that we have the label again. So now I have duplicate labels because I entered that in earlier in a previous page. So I'm going to go ahead and first name this to be comments, 4 rows by 40 columns. Okay, so that's how big I want my text box to be. I could specify a max length of characters in here, and that's quite common on websites. And again, I could put a default in here, say please enter your valued feedback, something like that. So now that would be text that would be placed there, giving them maybe some information about what they should enter. So now let's go ahead and remove this label, or move this label. Well, actually, you know what? Yeah, we're actually going to change this first to comments, and then take this, cut it, and paste it over this label that we created earlier. So now when I click up here, it says comments. Again, I have this 4 tied to this ID. Accessibility is all good. Okay, the next step is checkbox group, and this is on page 22. So I'm interested in information. So what kind of information am I actually interested in? So we have a checkbox group that we're going to insert. So when we do a group, it ties that group together. Whereas if we do a checkbox here, it makes them a single selection. It doesn't necessarily tie them together as one group. Okay, so we are going to do, give it a name, label of brochures. So checkbox group, and so brochures. And then we label what is the actual visitor going to see here, and we are going to see phishing. And the value is actually what is sent to the server. So this is then sent onto a program that actually processes the data. So phishing and cruises. Usually what you'll see in the value side is it's always lowercase, never any spaces in the value, because programming doesn't really work well with spaces. We're going to leave the label or the layout using line breaks, so we don't want to insert another table, but just some line breaks that will have this on one line and then cruises on another line. If I needed to add more or subtract, I got my plus and my minus here. I can reorder them with the arrows here as well. Okay, so I got my phishing and my cruises. Okay, so here with the label, it's tied together. So there's not like a separate label here, but the input checkbox is right nested inside of it. So we don't have to move information at all with checkboxes or radio buttons. Okay, so the next step is to do the radio buttons, which is page 24. So I would like to receive your newsletters. This is simply a yes or a no. So radio group button, and then we're going to name this newsletters, and the label is going to be yes. And notice how the value is a little different. So the programming language on the other end wants positive and negative to be sent with. Okay, so it's just something different. Definitely they could have said yes or no there as well. Okay, again using line breaks. So we have a yes or no option. Now if I didn't want these to be separated by a break, I could just simply come in here, remove the break tag, click up here, and now they're right next to each other. So I'm going to leave that like that so that you can see two separate examples that way. It doesn't change how the form is processed, it just changes how the form is displayed. The next thing was we're going to work with I learned about you from, so a menu option for us. So this is called select. So the select option, once we click that, notice it just inserts it where we wanted it to insert, and then down here we have to go ahead and change some properties. So reference is the name, and then we have to click on list values from here. That will actually give us our values that will be in that menu. Okay, so the menu is on page 27. The first one is select from list, which is usually our default, and the value none is sent along. Notice that very short values are sent to be processed, and always lowercase. Okay, so I have my 4 options with the default at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And if I were to switch over to live view, I would actually see how this would function, or even view it in a browser. So value none, friend, internet, magazine, TV, and then we have our options. Okay, so the label 4, okay, that is associated with this one right here. So we don't want that. We don't want select sitting here. So I'm going to take this I learned about you from, and I'm going to place it over the select. And then I'm going to take the label, just like I did before. I'm going to place it in that first cell. Okay, so now my label is I learned about you from is now associated with for reference, which is associated with ID reference. The for and the ID are always the ones that are connected. We are going to skip page 28, and here is why. You saw me demonstrate earlier how you just click on the required. Page 28 is actually demonstrating how we used to code for required fields, and now we just simply click on required, and it inserts a required equal required. So if I come back here to first name and click on required, you'll see it says required equal required. I'm going to go ahead and do that for last name and email. Those are all required. I'll click on phishing. I could do that as well. I could say some sort of required, but that's on value phishing, so you want to be very careful when you're doing checkboxes. Usually we don't do required on this. We use some sort of a scripting language that will run through each option and make sure that they've selected one. But in this case, maybe they're not interested in information about fishing or cruises. Maybe they just want to receive our newsletters. So we really don't want to force them to select. And even this, we don't really want to force them to say yes or no. I mean, they could do one way or the other, I guess you could argue that. Okay, and then I learned about you from. I mean, we could make this a required field. Okay, but then again, we want to make sure that we make them select at least one option and they're not selecting this one. So there's a lot of scripting that comes behind validation of forms, and in this class we just don't have that knowledge for that. So we could do required on the comments to make sure that they put required in there, but I'll just leave the first 3 as my options for now. Adding submit and reset buttons. So I'm going to do a little different order on the the submit and reset buttons. So I'm going to do reset first. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do submit. So I'm going to insert my submit button, and then I'm going to follow it by my reset button. So I have input type equals submit, and then input type equal reset. Now, this is how they do it in the book. I don't like reset being the rightmost button because that's usually what people click on. So I'm going to take that and actually make it before the submit button because I don't want them to accidentally click on reset. They lose all their information. I'd rather them be forced to look to the left to see where that reset button is. You can change the text on top of these. So if I want it to say clear form, I can do that. I can do this here too. I can say submit form. Okay, so you can change that. Testing and processing a form. So after we created our form, now we need to go ahead and make sure that we test it. Make sure that there's a logical flow of information in our form. Make sure that, for example, we don't put a button where it shouldn't be placed so that it could accidentally be clicked on. Make sure there's enough contrast between your form text and the table background so your text is actually readable. Very important. Okay, when a form contains several required fields that must be filled, it's a good idea to provide visual cues such as different font color or other notation that labels these fields as required fields. And so we're going to do that for our required fields that we set up. When you are finished with your form, you should always have several people test it before you publish it, and then make any necessary changes based on their feedback. So pages 31 through 33. So we are going to put just a little notation down here that says required fields. And then we're going to take and add that notation to our first name. So you can add it after, you could add it before. So this is just adding it to our labels. Okay, then number 7 says return to design view and then apply the feature item class to our submit and reset buttons. So here's our reset button, and we're going to apply feature item. And then submit form, same thing. Okay, now you'll notice that here it doesn't turn out exactly the way it should be. Let's pop it into live view and actually see what those buttons look like. Yep, it truncates them off, so you would have to set up some CSS styling to change the width because I don't believe we have any options down here changing the width of that button by default. So I'm going to change it back to submit, and then I'm going to change this one back to reset. Okay, so submit and reset and required fields. Okay, so we have our form done. So you're required to have one of these for your final project. Make sure you carefully plan it out. You're welcome to use this as one of your examples too, just don't make it identical. Open the About Us page and place the insertion point in the last sentence. So we're going to get our About Us page and we're going to actually link this feedback form via this page. So About Us, and select the map. So here we want to actually insert a paragraph. So the easiest way to do this is just to be in design view and hit enter, and then we'll type in exactly what they want us to. So feedback, and then we'll link that to our feedback file. Okay, so please give us your feedback so that we may make your next stay the best vacation ever. So let's go ahead and test. So we'll go ahead and open this up in a browser. We made some changes to the style sheet, so I want to save those changes. Come down, we'll click on feedback. Notice that the required fields by default with browser validation have that pink background to them. Once we fill it in, that background goes away. Okay, and that's all that is required. I'm going to go ahead and click on reset. Notice that it resets it. So first name, last name. Okay, and then I'm going to click on submit. Okay, notice that submit does nothing because we don't have anything set up at this point. So this is where I kind of deviate from the book a little bit and show you some further options. So we have a couple options with this form. Let's go ahead and do the email one first. So I'm going to click on the red border so that I get my form, or I can click on form down here in the tag selector. In my action, I'm going to type in mail to : no spaces in this at all. I can actually just do this all lowercase. So mail to : and then an email. Ugh. Sometimes I like to blend two emails together. Okay, so with that, you want to choose multi-part form data for your encryption type when you use email. So multi-part form data when you use email for your action. So mail to, no spaces, : no spaces, and then the email address. Okay, that is one option. So then that information will be sent then via email. So let's see how my computer behaves with this, because it's not always the most. Sometimes how they have things set up here at BSC doesn't always work. Okay, so I'm going to do this. Phishing, yes. I'll just take that out, and then I'm going to click submit. So it opens up email. I'll click on this one, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on send. So close that out. And then I'm going to open up my BSC email and see if I've gotten that email yet. If not, we'll sit and wait for it. We won't sit and wait for it. I'll show you. Yep, here it is. Okay, so it looks like it didn't send anything with. Interesting. Wonder why that is. I'll have to dig into that. Yeah, it should have sent an attachment with. Some sort of an attachment. Let's change this. Maybe things have changed over time. And let's try this test again. So I'll have to reset my form here. Yeah, so don't do that multi-part form data. See, this is what I was trying to avoid, but I guess this is the way we need to do it. You used to send it along as like an attached file, but this is the data that would come across. I'm sure there's better options. Okay, the other option is to use what I have in the assignments page. It doesn't necessarily send the data, but it will do like a feedback type of page to the user. So this is Form Processor. I want you to click on Form Processor. It's going to open up a page and it's going to say this: your form has been submitted, you entered the following data. So in order to get the code that's behind this page, you do Control-U on your keyboard. So all of this JavaScript code, the only thing that we need is lines 11 through 25. So we take that, we copy, and then we come back over here and we're going to use the index file. So we're going to use our index file as our template. If you're nervous about using the index file as your template, just simply save it as template. Then you don't have to worry about losing your index file. So here's my template. And what I wanted to do is give me all my feedback information in this area here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And then in my P tag here, I'm going to insert that code that I just copied. Go ahead and close that. Okay, and then I have all of it. It doesn't matter how you position it in there. Okay, so I will save this as form processor. So form processor.html. Okay, and I'm going to click on save. So now I have a form processor file. Okay, and I'm going to use that as my action. So notice when it's form processor, this is exactly what you saw in that when you clicked on the link. Okay, so I'm going to go back to feedback, and in my action, I'm going to link to form processor. Okay, I'm going to say that again, you have to change the method to get to work with this particular file. Okay, otherwise it will not work. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save and come back to form processor. No, actually not to form processor, this page, feedback, reset it, put in my information. So this is the testing part to make sure that it worked correctly. Do some phishing, yes, from a friend, and submit. Your form has been submitted. You entered the following information. Okay, so either way, okay, for coffee shop, for sure. Okay, so you have to have a functional form. So either use the form processor. Okay, and all I did was save my index file as template so that I didn't lose my index file. Refresh here. Okay, as template, and then use template to create the form processor.html file. Replace the content in the middle with the code that is here, lines 11 through 25. Okay? Or you can use email, totally your preference as to which route you want to go. So that is chapter 9. So let's make sure that I haven't missed anything. So blooms and bulbs, section plan and create a form, menu path. So we have HTML instead of a different category. Again, when working with the form directions, it's best to use insert the form object, adjust your label text, and then move it to that first cell, just like I demonstrated today. And then same thing for TripSmart. And then choose to make sure that your form is functional in some way for coffee shop. So do I have, yep, email. Okay, and I'll put in here lines 11 through 25 so that you know for sure which ones you need to copy. So that is it, you guys. That is CIS 230, the last lecture. And so now it's just, finishing this chapter and then really working hard on Coffee Shop to get those 100 points. Make sure you check out the video that reviewed the grading rubrics. And if there's anything that you need me to debug or want me to help with, you just need to contact me. Thank you, and thanks for a great semester.